Other questions? All right, I'm going to go back and start hitting repeat, folks, because some of them have extra questions. All right, yes, sir. You're up.
I know the oil prices have declined like in 2014, 2015. Do you think that it'll keep declining, or do you think it'll probably stabilize a little?
Your question is, oil prices have declined in 2014, 2015. Do I anticipate that oil prices will get cheaper, or will they stay about the same? I'm going to add on, or will they go up? I do not think they will go up. I think that they will stabilize, and then we'll see fluctuations based on season. Now, there will be upward pressure when the world economy starts going better. If the U.S. economy gets better, you'll see the rest of the world start to get better too. When the economy starts percolating in the United States, you'll see an increase in the beginning, but about a year later, you'll see it go back down, and I think it'll stabilize. There's a certain point where the oil companies can't make any money, and we're pretty close to that, so that's why I think it'll stay in this area, go up, 10, 20 cents. But I do think it may jump when the economy goes, but then it'll come back down. Why? Why will it come back down? It jump when the economy gets hot, and then it'll come back down. Why is that? What did somebody say? Say something. Speak to me. Somebody said something. I couldn't hear it. All right, I'll just tell you. Supply and demand. So, there you go. So here's what happens. If the demand goes up and the price goes up, there are more people who will say, wait a minute, we can supply and make some money now. And they just discovered another, I forget how many, millions of barrels of oil at a new level underneath the desert in Texas. We've got so many oil supply. Right now, the United States has the largest supply. Saudi Arabia is still producing the most. The United States has passed them a few times in certain months. But we are now considered the number one supplier, or the number one, not supplier, but the number one reserves for oil in the world. We're number one in coal, and we're number one in natural gas. When you want to talk about fossil fuels, one of the reasons I want to find a way to burn them more efficiently and cleaner is we are the king. The United States is the king in the world of the fossil fuels. So why wouldn't we want to find ways to burn that cleanly so that we can make more money off of it? Right now, natural gas prices, we can ship it to Europe and sell it cheaper, still make a profit, and sell it cheaper than the Russians, who are now the European number one seller or number one supplier of natural gas. We can ship it to Asia, and even with the shipping costs, make a profit and sell it cheaper than the current price in Asia. We can bring their prices down and still make a profit and still have the cheapest sources of energy in the world. By golly, it's in our national interest to find a way to use it effectively and efficiently and cleanly. That's going to make your futures much better. Okay? By the way, this is one of my little stories I like to tell. You know why you want to be number one economic nation for as long as you possibly can be? And that doesn't mean it'll be forever. Why you want to be there? Because if we do it right, it's not just your generation. It's your children and your grandchildren that will benefit by us having done it correctly and built a strong economy. I'll be long dead and gone if we can do it right. And I use this example, and I like it because it's a good example. From 1650 to roughly 1700, the Netherlands was number one economic nation. You all still spend money with one of the descendant companies of the Netherlands economic powerhouse from the 1600s. Anybody know what it is? All right, we were talking about gasoline. That's what brought it to my mind. How many of you have ever bought gas at the Shell station? You know what the formal name of the company is? Royal Dutch Shell. They did exploration, and they ultimately, one of their companies, the Dutch East India Company, ultimately discovered oil in Indonesia, which was part of their territory at one time, but is today Indonesia. And they're still making money off of having been the number one military and economic power in the world. 1650 to 1700. Do you think any of those people alive that set up the Dutch East India Company had any idea that their great-great-great-great-grandchildren, I probably left out a few greats, would still be benefiting? That's why we've got to fight to be #1 economic nation for as long as possible. Someday somebody will overtake us, but we shouldn't welcome it. We shouldn't say, oh yeah, let's do that, that's good. No, that's not good. What we want to be is #1 as long as we can. Other questions? You had one earlier, have you?
Do you plan on going any higher in politics?
The question is, do I plan on going any higher in politics? The answer is no. However, I didn't plan on necessarily running for Congress, although it had always been something I wanted to do. But the circumstances lined up. I thought that my predecessor had voted wrong on some issues for our region, and I felt compelled to run. Do I think that will happen again? No, I don't. One, I don't believe I can win a United States Senate seat, even though I'm a legislator, so I'm not looking to run for governor or anything like that. So the Senate might be an option, but I don't believe I can win a United States Senate seat in Virginia because I'm very pro-gun and have introduced and voted on a lot of gun legislation, both in the House of Delegates and in Congress. And in parts of Virginia, that's considered, anathema. And hey, I love what I'm doing, so there's no great desire to do something else. As long as I can try to reform the United States Congress and feel like I'm doing a good job at representing the region, then I'll continue to do that job as long as y'all will have me. And as long as I can do a good job. Every politician has a lifespan in effectiveness, and you have to figure out when that's done. And if you don't figure it out as an elected representative, the public will figure it out for you. Okay. Other questions? Yes, sir.
The use of natural gas in electric cars, is that going to be seen growing more, or are we going to see more domination of oil vehicles?
Question is natural gas and electric cars. Are we going to see more of those, or do we think that oil will continue? I think that you'll see all kinds of new things. I think that the gas-driven combustion engine will decline. I do not think it will disappear, but I do think it will decline. Part of the problem that you have is a distribution system. Natural gas right now, particularly with the prices of natural gas, would make a lot of sense, but there's just not enough distribution of where you can go in and fill up. The Japanese, I told you I was there looking at energy things last year. We actually visited a gas station for hydrogen cell vehicles. Basically, they're filling up with water that's treated a certain way. That'll work in megalopolises like around Tokyo, because you can have a few stations. It's just not practical to put those all over the United States. I don't see them being a big part of the market here, although American companies are making those types of cars. Natural gas makes more sense here. Electric will continue to go on the rise. The problem with electricity is you got to figure out how to make it more efficient, because right now it's very difficult to get your money back out. People buy them because they want to be ecologically sound and help the environment. But it's very hard to get your money back out of them, because you spend a certain amount extra. You have to drive a lot of miles on the electric side of that. And of course the other thing is that some folks want to get rid of coal, and today and at least through 2030, 30% of American power will be driven by coal. So if you're hooking your car into the electric socket, you got to burn more coal and more natural gas. So it'll be interesting to see how that market shakes out. But if the car's price comes down about 20%, then I would see electric dominating. But until that happens, it's not likely to happen. It's like, how many of y'all have seen these cars that say on the back of them, flex fuel? They'll take flex fuel. Yeah, they're out there. How many flex fuel stations do we have in the 9th District? 22 counties, 7 independent cities. How many flex fuel stations do we have? 2. Got one in Henry County and one in Wytheville. So how many people are, so now the car companies are telling me they're just not building the flex fuel because there's just not enough folks using it. They're not building it. Just unfortunate fact. Key is going to be if natural gas can get out there and suddenly start having a lot of gas stations, you'll see more natural gas cars. Okay? A couple more questions. Does that sound good, Mr. Ross? Question over here. Ryan? Did you have another question? Oh, is it time for lunch? He's telling me I was going to ask her. All right. Anybody have another policy question? All right, then I am going to talk just for a brief minute about the debt and the deficit. I think it's important you all be aware of what's going on there. So often, and I'll come back to you in just a second, but so often people hear about these big numbers and they don't think it relates to them. The debt and the deficit are very important, particularly for young people. Now, let me tell you what the difference is. The debt is what you owe total. The deficit is what you spend that you don't have in a given year. That's when you hear those terms, that's what it means. So when we have a $19 trillion, $20 trillion debt, or $500 billion deficit, that means $500 billion this year that we've spent that we didn't have the money, we charged it on the credit card. The debt is closing in on $20 trillion if it hadn't already crossed it. That means it's on the credit card and we've got to pay it back. Now y'all can go back and do some math later, but that's big money. And the way it works is we got to pay interest on that money. And who's going to pay more of it? The 58-year-old guy or the 17 or 18-year-olds? 17, 18-year-olds. So whenever you hear folks saying that the government can do something and all we have to do is spend X number of dollars, you might want to ask where those dollars are coming from, because what we've been doing in my generation is we've been spending money hoping that the economy will grow, and I hope it does. That's the best way out of this problem, is to grow the economy. But if we don't grow the economy and we keep piling up massive debt, when you're in your 40s or 50s, taxes are going to be so high, or inflation is going to be so high, that it's going to make your lives not nearly as comfortable as your parents' lives. So pay attention to those issues when they're in the news, and don't think, well, that doesn't apply to me. Because 20, 30 years from now, you're going to be paying all that money back. And I don't want to see my kids having to pay that money back, and I don't want to see y'all having to pay that back. I'd rather see us grow the economy, which is why you'll hear me talk about regulations are hurting jobs. Because the more people working who have jobs, the more taxes are being collected without raising them. You don't have to raise the taxes, just raise the number of people paying the taxes, and suddenly you find that we can work ourselves out of this debt and deficit problem. But we can't just spend ourselves into oblivion, because it's you all are going to have to pay it back. All right, got another question over here, real quick, last one. What do I like and dislike about my job? And it's not off topic, that's a good question. What I dislike about this job that I liked better about the state legislature was in the state legislature, if you had a good idea and you could go convince people, you could get it done quickly. In this job, it doesn't matter if it's a good idea, it takes you a year or two just to get somebody to pay attention and get the thing rolling. So, I like to spit out ideas, and some of them are stinkers, but some of them are really good. And it's hard to get folks to start moving towards it and gravitating towards it. It takes forever to get things done. I talked about cures earlier. A friend of mine came up with the 21st century cures concept. I think they're going to get it passed the week after this. We've been working on that thing for 2.5 to 3 years. And it dumps money into research on diseases that aren't being covered already by other programs. It's more the rare diseases, but we feel like we'll find some cures for some really tough nuts to crack. And what always happens when you spend money is sometimes you're trying to cure disease A and you find a cure for disease B. But either way, you've got to spend the money, and only the federal government can do that. Private industry isn't going to spend the money to find cures for diseases that might affect only 10,000 people. Because for the drug companies to make any money off of it, they got to sell it to a lot of folks. And so this is an area where the federal government has to act. I believe in it. But it's taken us about 2.5 to 3 years to get that ready for the vote, which I think, it could all blow up, but I think we're trying to go week after this on that. So that's frustrating. What do I like about it? I really do like talking to folks. I like getting ideas. Some of the best ideas I've ever had have come out of meetings with constituents. And, It's very rewarding to feel that you've encouraged people to be involved in their government and to bring ideas to the government to try to figure out what we can do. Most of the time it's better to leave it in the private industry or at local or state level, but if it's something that only the federal government can do, I want folks to bring me those ideas, and that's very encouraging. Thank you all very much for this time.